Focus up, nerds. It's time to stack those 60s. Welcome to another episode of the Brawl podcast. It's great to have you along. My name's Riley Knight, your host of this week and every week. And joining me, as usual, we have Toralf Toffel Severin.
Hello.
Okay, bit of a different take on the on the archetype this time, Toffel. And we also have Jamin.
It's really difficult to introduce yourself in a different way every time.
Yeah, at one point we just pre-record it and you just do it alone.
Maybe we should look at investing in some catchphrases for you guys. Like, we've got "That's the game of magic" as our general sort of that's our podcast catchphrase now apparently.
And that's the host of Toffel.
That's really bad.
Something like "It's a me, Jamin." No, you don't want to dip into that sort of that territory's been pretty explored. All right, well we'll work on that. But if you've got any interesting ideas for catchphrases for these two idiots that I have to do the podcast with. My friends, we are going to, we sort of thought, the other week, we started off on a little path. We were going to start doing, general primers to archetypes within Brawl. We wanted to do aggro, mid-range, and control, that sort of thing. Having ticked aggro off the list, we want to move on now to mid-range. And that's sort of that's the game plan for this week. We are going to talk about mid-range decks in general. If at all possible, it's going to be helpful for you to have some deck lists open while we're talking through this show. We've provided lists to 3 deck lists that you can find in the show notes. And so, obviously it'll be fine if you don't have them, but, it might be helpful for you to have these lists up just to refer to the cards and the curve and that sort of stuff. So jump on the show notes if you can and open up those deck lists. And we'll give you some time to do that because while you're fiddly farting around with, the URLs and getting those deck lists ready, well, the 3 of us can have a bit of a catch up. It's time for the ketchup.
So, while playing a lot of Brawl, you sometimes get bored of, only winning, right?
Yeah.
So,
I hate that. It sucks. I mean, this is why, I have to play decks like Ariel because, just winning all the time. Jeez, it's not even hard anymore.
It's really tough on the mind. So, I built a lot of new decks, and surprisingly, most of them work out somehow. As long as you stick to having a curve to still have game against mono red and stuff. So,
well, that's one of the points. You're applying our stuff to basically bad strategies, but they're still good enough to get you somewhere.
Yeah, they really are. And I always open my pity treasure chest. It's the one treasure chest you get out of going 3 and 2.
Oh.
I guess at this point, the format, it's kind of good and kind of bad. I don't like how few deck lists are posted because we get basically the results of 1 league per week. And then even then we only get 6 or 7 deck lists, which is good in some ways because all the deck lists are different and you get to see some cool technology and what people are playing with and whatever else, which is obviously slowing the development of the format. But I don't know, man. I wish there were a more, I wish the weekly, what are they called? The challenges. I wish the challenges were still on because there's just not really a weekly outlet for real spiky Brawl play.
We all wish that challenges were still on.
I don't know what happened there. Nice.
Someone made a huge mistake and we all get punished for it, unfortunately.
There's upside to it. It's not all doom and gloom, but yeah, certainly not ideal. Anyway, yeah, I know you, so tell us about what are some of the decks that you've been sort of just, wildly experimenting and going, well, 3-2 isn't too bad with, to be honest. 3-2 is...
3-2 is fine. I had some Sahili, I had some Padim. I also played Gaita for the first time ever. I can't believe I hadn't played Gaita before. Another deck I tried out was all in Hazoret. It's still mono red, but it's all the 1-drops. No matter how bad they are, your goal is just to attack with Hazoret on turn 4.
Like when you get a quest on Hearthstone, play 30 Shaman cards, and you just play all the 0 and 1-drops that you can. Yeah,
exactly. That's the Hazoret deck. But it turns out that attacking with Hazoret's really hard if casting Hazoret doesn't take a card out of your hand, right? Because you cast it from the command zone. Yeah. So that actually makes getting to 1 card in hand really hard.
Wait, but because you actually have to end up with 0 cards in hand starting the turn.
Yeah, exactly. The last card you play has to be the land, and then you have to have 1 card in hand, right? Yeah. So lots of cool stuff going on.
Have you guys drafted any cube?
I have.
I drafted Storm for the first time ever.
Really?
And I won one game.
I think
It's really hard. Like
Yeah.
I think I even think my deck was actually good. I had Yorgmoth's Bargain, I had Necropotence, I had Brain Freeze and Tendrils, I had a bunch of fast mana and like Turnabout and Mana Flare and Heartbeat. I had all the cards like Fast Bond, and I just couldn't do it. I won game 1, lost game 2 horribly, like drew 14 cards and still lost, and then timed out. Yeah, it was it was really hard.
In my experience, the cards you need are Yawgmoth's Will and Blindside Diamond. Like, those are the kinds of storm decks that work for me.
Well, you're much better at the game than I am as well. I couldn't get it together. Anyway, what have you guys drafted?
I usually try to get for an artifact deck, then everybody picks artifacts, and I have like an academy that can on average produce 1.4 mana.
That's my draft, dude. That's my average draft.
And then I also played like a red-blue deck then, and I was going like, sweet, I have this Emrakul, right? And you can take over turns and all the stuff, and I was pretty excited because I missed like wind options and I didn't have really ramp and all the stuff, so I was going to play. And then I had deck Faden, which is pretty good, and I drew the Emrakul and it's like, okay, I just need to cast it, and I realized that it was the 15 mana Emrakul, and it was just
great.
doing nothing in my deck.
Great.
It was very sad, yeah. And like at this point, I thought my deck was kind of okay. I still have Emrakul and can stall to it, but then it just got like horrendous.
And you need to draw 15 out of your 17 lands. Yeah, that's pretty bad.
I mean, I had technically the chance of playing Gilded Lotus and Thran Dynamo and untapping them with Tezzeret. That was the only possibility.
That's the best way. Yeah, right.
I had a really sweet play come up in a deck that I drafted. I had like a blue-red deck with Splinter Twin and Kiki Jiki and Pestermite, right?
Oh, lazy man's draft.
No, it wasn't lazy, like, whatever. I had Pestermite in hand, and my opponent knew about that. And then I drew Kiki Jiki, but I didn't have a single red source yet, and my opponent had a reasonably good Reanimator deck. So I thought, like, well, I lost this game, right? And then my opponent decided to play Show and Tell.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Yeah, he put like Ulamog into play, and then I flashed in the Pestermite, put in the Kiki Jiki, and the rest is history.
The rest
Easy game.
is history.
So I guess the moral of the story is don't play Show and Tell.
Yeah, geez, don't play Show and Tell in cube most of the time. It's just the trap.
So this week is all about mid-range in Brawl. We're going to be, as I said, we're going to be referring to 3 specific deck lists throughout this episode. But really, mid-range decks are not limited to the decks, the lists that we're going to talk about. And generally, there's a pretty broad and open field when it comes to building a mid-range deck in Brawl, especially due to the very few constraints that go into what a mid-range deck consists of. But the 3 decks that we're going to talk about, Padim, Ghalta, and Gonti, the 3 lists are available on our show notes there, so you can click through to that and find them. Generally speaking, however, if we can kind of zoom out and look at mid-range as a whole, for those who may not have the sort of the fullest understanding of what a mid-range deck is or what it involves, what is it that defines mid-range?
Well, we all know what aggro decks are, right? They spend all their resources on finishing the opponent quickly, racing down their life total most of the time. So they don't really care about card advantage, but they sacrifice all of that to just end the game quickly. And we all know what control decks are. They do the exact opposite. They try to get card advantage everywhere and then grind out the opponent by having more cards than them and trading them against the opponent's cards. And mid-range falls exactly in the middle, right? It usually just plays the most efficient cards at what they do, and it doesn't really care if they generate card advantage or not, because they're just the best at what they do, right? They're the best at trading 1-for-1 or the best at generating tempo. That's kind of how you can define mid-range, I would say. I think
a good way to evaluate a mid-range deck is to essentially look at each card being very, very good on its own. So mid-range decks shouldn't have too much of a reliance on synergy, and every card should be capable of by itself, pushing you towards victory, if not winning the game on its own. I mean, anyone who's played even a little bit of Modern will understand that Jund is the most mid-range of mid-rangey decks because all of the cards in that deck are powerhouses in and of themselves. So mid-range decks really are about singular power level of specific cards rather than, a group of cards working together.
And this is really interesting in Brawl because we already discussed multiple times that the power level of cards in Brawl is not super high.
No, it drops off really fast because we can't play 4 of the best card. You can only play 1 of the best card.
So your mid-range decks are featuring some of your favorite trade binder cards that have been sitting there since you first picked them in draft.
But that's not the idea of mid-range. You were promised the best cards.
Yeah, well, you got sometimes the best cards. You got to compromise a little bit on your standards here, especially in a singleton format. Because usually, if you've got 16 slots to fill, all you have to do is pick the 4 best cards to fill those 16 slots. But here, you need 16 different cards. So I like Trade Binder. I like this as a deck name. Generally speaking, like when I see something really like an interesting sort of tier 3 deck that 11-4 to GP, I like calling it, it's Sultai Trade Binder, for example. And some of these lists, I mean, the Gonti one just looks like black Trade Binder, for example.
Indeed. All of our 3 lists being monocolored means that they also don't have access to many of the other colors cards, or like any of the other colors cards. So you're restricted to 1 color, so like your power level drops off even more, and it's just Trade Binder.
But don't you feel that with the restriction of cards that a lot of the decks that try to be aggressive have to go more towards mid-range because they're missing like the good cards? Or you say it's just generally a better option to play worse cards for aggressive strategies and then not fall into the mid-range spectrum?
It all depends on what you want to do. Like, if I talked about mono red Hazoret, right? Well, obviously I have to like give up a lot of power just to like enable my commander. I've also seen Karizev lists play multiple 4 and 5 drops, kind of enabling a bigger game plan, but only playing the premium cards on each slot, right? You get to play stronger cards at the expense of being more in the mid-range pool, right?
Yeah, I think Toffel's point is a really good one here because it's sort of, the more you want, the better you want your deck to be in terms of card quality, the more likely your deck is to be mid-rangey. And Mono Red's a good example of that because you can play all in Hazoret with all the 1 drops, all the 2 drops, or you can look to include stuff, all the 4 and the 5 drops, in which case, because you're only playing 1 copy of them all, it's necessarily going to become slower and more mid-rangey. So I think Toffel makes a really good point there. It's you've got to make a little bit of a choice between, are you wanting to play a faster, more synergistic game plan, or are you going to fall into that mid-range spectrum just based on the quality of your cards alone? It's
also everything that you take away in the beginning kind of needs to be put up in the end of the mana curve, and especially if you want to beat slower decks and control decks, because you're not beating by tempo, which is mostly the best strategy to counter their best cards, because them not being able to play them makes them render like valuelessly bad. So you have to include some 5 or even 6 mana cost cards that have a strong effect that can be controlled on their own, like the Immortal Sun, for example. I know you're a big fan of the card, and this leads them to play more lands. This leads them to play more spells that actually support getting to those stages of the game, and that's the whole point of mid-range.
Yeah, your mid to late game cards definitely have to pack some punch, because otherwise you'll just not outclass your opponent.
And again, it comes back to what we were talking about in terms of just individual card quality. You'll get to a point where eventually your 4, 5, 6 drops will, you want to engineer a position where you will win the game based on raw quality of cards. Let's talk about the mid-range game plan and how it differs against different archetypes, because a mid-range deck will operate on a very different axis when playing an aggro player compared to when playing a control player.
So in general, mid-range decks have, from the historical classic archetype point of view, an advantage over the aggro decks, because they're usually just a bit slower. They start up with very good 2 drops, very impressive 3 drops, and then they are very capable of stealing the game back early, so they don't take a lot of damage. And at that point, you are very comfortable playing those creature decks because your creatures are much better in the late game. It doesn't need you a lot of cards to get ahead. And on the other point, what we see sometimes nowadays in Standard is that the mid-range decks are very capable outvaluing the control decks, because they play cards that accidentally do a lot of value, like Siphoner or Rogue Refiner, as it was legal, and Argus Bloodfest and all that stuff. And the combination of playing the good cards that get card advantage, but also the solid cards to defeat the aggro decks is very potent. Just means that you have to kind of draw the ones in the right order, right? Like, if you cannot defend yourself, you're very weak against aggro. If you cannot get the card selection or quality, you are very weak against control. That's why your creatures or your cards have to be very good in general, because you have to mitigate the effect that you're drawing the wrong cards.
The fact that you just mentioned that creatures are so good these days that mid-range can often outvalue control just because cards like Siphoner exist. Like, look at the Gonti deck. It can play Siphoner on 2, Dreadshade on 3, which doesn't generate value, but it's a huge threat, right? Otherwise, you just play Dreamstealer on turn 3. That's such a huge threat against control.
Yeah.
I remember Hour of Devastation Limited and that card taking games off of me.
I've discarded like 7 cards to it.
Like, in one game, you mean?
Yeah. Like, you play on 3 and then you just like pump spell. I think it was like, there's something huge like +3/+3 and stuff.
Yeah, I remember. I think Crash the Ramparts. No, that was Exilon. No, that was
like
Exilon.
There was a card that was pumping it enough, and I discarded like 5 to 6 cards.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, thank you.
So then you also have like Twilight Prophet on 4, Liliana as a turn 5 play, and then it's just so much value packed in the creatures that are still threats and that can still defend yourself against mono red.
Yeah, a lot of the points mid-range decks got. Well, this is recently, but not really recently, they got from Planeswalkers, because that's a tool that is very good against aggressive deck once you stabilize and get them on the board, but also once you have them on the board against control, you just get those value every time. It's like an enchantment that you get every round. You don't have to activate it, and usually the ultimate is game ending, so they even cannot just deal with the once each turn activation, but also against the final thing. Like, if your opponent has Chandra, you're not really super afraid of the 2 damage or the card that comes out once in a while. You're actually pretty fine. But once you get to the point where they ultimate, you're like, okay, I cannot do anything anymore.
Unless the control player has Disallow in the hand that turn, it's usually game over.
And when you look at the way that the Gonti list has been put together and sort of what it's attempting to do, you can see how value-focused this list is, not only with the Commander Gonti, essentially being a 2-for-1 every time, but every single 2-drop, which is unbelievable. All the 2-drops that it plays are essentially close to being 2-for-1s, or at least they generate some sense of value. I mean, the worst cards are, Dusk Legion, Zealot, and Seeker's Squire. From there, you move up to stuff like Gifted Aetherborn, which is always going to gain you some life, always going to kill at least 1 card with Death Touch. Glintsleeve Siphoner, which draws you extra cards. Kite Sail Freebooter, which is a great disruptive option. Even Bone Picker can be a 2-drop, very aggressive 2-drop, again, that has Death Touch to remove an opposing creature if you need to. This whole list, I mean, it looks like a sort of ragtag bunch of random, draft all-stars, but this deck it's more focused than it seems at first blush, because as you continue to move up the curve, Ravenous Chupacabra, Twilight Prophet, Noxious Gearhulk, all of these cards are designed to generate further advantage, incremental advantage by gaining you an extra card, by killing an extra creature, whatever.
To be fair though, this Gonti list plays lots of answers that impact the board. Like, Gearhulk is not a great card against control. You can see this Gonti list was built with aggro in mind, since it plays Cartouche of Ambition, for example, the lifelink enchantment. It doesn't even play the Immortal Sun, which I heavily disagree with out of any mid-range deck. And it also plays cards like Vicious Offering or Moment of Craving, because it's afraid of the aggressive 2-drops.
Okay, so this deck has certainly been built in a certain way, and I mean that's one of the sort of facets of mid-range decks, right, is that they're very customizable. You can chop and change them as you choose to tackle whichever kind of deck or field you're expecting.
Exactly.
So obviously we've highlighted 3 lists, Golter, Padim, and Gonti today, but there are plenty more. There are plenty more than that. So we've talked about the Scarab God in control, but you can also, we see this in standard, you can build blue-black mid-range with the Scarab God at the top end. It's very possible to do that, much more of a heavy focus on creatures. Harpatra or Slimefoot, if you're interested in green-black. Both of those cards are pretty synergistic or, engine-based cards, but you can just use them for the colors and build a deck that is as not synergistic as you prefer. Muldrotha, I know, is a fan favorite. We haven't seen Muldrotha really put up the numbers in Brawl so far, but it's a very, very powerful card. Tatiova as well, another terrific engine card. Angrath, I guess, is just one of the most backbreaking plays against control, especially on an empty board, discarding cards and being a real clock for them. Of course, Ariel as well, an absolute standard, an absolute all-star in both standard and Brawl. And it's not a particular. Actually, no, Ariel isn't even. Ariel's just a bad synergy deck, really, because you don't have
the payoff.
No, all the knights are only good when you have a critical mass of them. The removal's very good. It's the best removal in the format, I would say, but. We can probably leave Ariel out of this discussion.
And we all know why it's in the list.
Yeah, we all. Yeah, well, never mind. Anyway,
we all know who put it there.
There's a very high level of implicit bias here. All of these decks, however, everything from Tatiova to Muldrotha to the Scarab God, if you're building a mid-range flavor version there, all of them have a similar kind of mid-range flavor?
Yeah, I was just like, okay, I'm going to the ice cream store. What do you want?
Yeah.
I would like a big scoop of mid-range flavor.
A little bit of removal, then some early game, but not too much. That would be
just a sprinkle of top end on the top. Yeah, good. Don't eat your cards, by the way. They don't. It's just general good advice. I think the 3 of us can get behind. That's a good piece of Stacking 60s advice, right?
Don't eat magic cards.
Don't eat your cards. Yeah, don't eat cards. Yeah. Well, no matter how many, different types of chopped nuts you get on top of your mid-range ice cream, all mid-range decks are going to run into some pretty similar problems, right? There's kind of there's a couple of issues that crop up for mid-range decks no matter how they're built.
It's as nice as it sounds from you're playing only the best cards and they're pretty cool and stuff. You also have the problem that in Brawl, everybody has access to the commander, and when you're trying a strategy that plays powerful singular cards to get ahead, them having commanders is not what you want, because that really diminishes your effect each card has. So usually the commanders are very strong, very dangerous. We saw it in Hazoret and Teferi and all this stuff. So they are the best cards a deck can offer, and usually they're just at a point of the game where it just matters a lot, right? You have to deal with this very quickly in order to stay in the game. Otherwise, you're losing the game very quickly. And the games for mid-range are usually the way that you have to answer one of those threats once, maybe twice, maybe none of the times, because they just don't draw it in normal formats. But in Commander, they always have it, always on curve, always with the possibility to access the full potential. And that's the problem, because you don't have as much removal spells as you want as in standard. Imagine 4 Rustless Contempt, but here you actually have to have them because they're imminent all the time.
It's actually a huge issue because, to put this in perspective again, we'll go back to the example of Modern. Jund is a deck that plays best off the top, right? It looks to use Thoughtseize Inquisition to empty the opponent's hand. It uses Liliana and whatever else Tarmogoyf Scavenging is to assault the board. And eventually, if you could tell a Jund player, all right, the game's going to start with 5 lands in play and 0 cards in hand, the Jund player would snap that situation off because they know that their card quality is going to protect them over the top. The problem here is when they sit down against, their blue-white opponent, they always have Geist of Saint trapped in hand. They always can play this threat again and again and again and again and again. And that's not something we see in Modern because of the way the decks are built, but here in Brawl, that's basically what it's like. They've always got access to their best threat or their best value engine or whatever.
When your strongest part of the game in a deck is the mid-game, that's kind of weak because usually in the mid-game, your commander is very important, right? it's where most of the decks rely on their commander, right? Like aggro curves out and then plays their commander, or control like answers your stuff and then plays Teferi. And you kind of sit there not knowing if you want to play your commander or play your best threat. It can be awkward at times.
Also, like, you can beat control decks when they don't draw the important cards, but since the Teferi decks will have Teferi about all the time, again and again, it's not that your cards can keep up with this. So you have this one side where aggressive decks always have the last potential threat. They always have Hazoret when you're under life. They always have maybe Chandra when they need to deal the extra damage. But they also have on the control side always the one important control card that makes your last threat go away, that makes your their card advantage engine going. And that's pretty rough to deal with. Like, this combination is immense for the effect of a mid-range deck, and as we see it, like, there aren't too many mid-range decks that are very successful. There's some, and usually, of course, your good cards will carry you, but there's nothing as dominating as, for example, Timur Energy was, or Jund was in Modern and stuff.
Yeah, like, most of the time in Brawl, you're gonna, like, either play against an aggro deck or a hard control deck in, like, Tezzeret or Teferi. Very few decks will be like dedicated mid-range decks.
It's a bit like Commander was, right? All the commanders back then were very cheap and very effective in Tymna and Thrasios and all this stuff. And it's very hard to go up because your commander is so powerful, you want to use them all the time. And then on the other spectrum were a lot of control decks or combo decks.
Well, let's talk about how these decks actually come together, because all of the mid-range decks tend to follow a sort of general archetype guide or a kind of pattern as to what happens with all of these lists. Even if they're across different colors, they'll still share broad similarities across, how the curve is filled out. So what actually goes into building a mid-range deck?
I think Toffel might have some good guidelines.
Welcome to Toffel's Guidelines. Guideline number 1. Only play premium 1-drops. It's very easy to play the bad cards. Don't do it. Play the good ones instead.
Riley, can you tell me which 1-drop Galta will run?
Well, we're looking at 1-drops. I mean, in specific reference to the list that we've pulled up here, there aren't many 1-drops at all, actually. The only 1-drops in Padim, Galta, and Gonti are found in the Galta list. There's only 2 of them, Greenbelt Rampager and Llanowar Elves.
It's Llanowar Elves. It's the best play in Brawl. There's nothing better you can do on turn 1, I would say. There is Ovia into Mox Amber into Llanowar Elves.
Damn,
yes, I've played against really that, and I have conceded on turn 1.
But also, I wouldn't count it because it also plays Llanowar Elves, so...
Yeah, but Llanowar Elves is busted. Greenbelt Rampager is not really a 1-drop, but you can play it on turn 1 once. Yeah, but Llanowar Elves busted.
There's also cards like Prey Upon and Shaper's Sanctuary, which I wouldn't say are premium all-star cards, but...
If you manage to play Prey Upon on turn 1, something really weird must have happened.
Well, there's only Topter.
Yeah.
Or, as you say, you can land, Ovia, Mox things, bam, fight your Llanowar Elf.
Yeah, and then your Llanowar Elf is dead.
Well, where's your Llanowar Elf now?
You don't control.
Yeah, you have Ovia and Llanowar Elf.
Okay, yeah. All right, let's move on to a golden rule number 2.
Guideline, come on, please.
I'm sorry.
Guideline number 2. Only play very good 2-drops because you will fill the slots with good removal instead.
So as we talked about, the 2-drops in Gonti, Lord of Luxury, all attempt to do the same thing and pull you a little bit further ahead with cards or with removaling creatures. Removaling creatures, sure.
Everyday removaling.
It's similar in Galta, where all of the 2-drops are essentially, they've got bigger, they're undercosted beaters. They've got high power and toughness for low cost. And then you look at Padim, where there are a lot of 2-dropped artifacts. There are things like Walking Ballista, which I guess can be a 2-drop, Glint Nest Crane, which finds more artifacts. So even though, you're looking at 3 different decks with 3 different play styles, all of I think the really important thing to notice about the 2-drops in these 3 lists is all of them are really attempting to support the overall game plan of the deck. The 2-drops are absolutely 100% on board with what this deck is trying to do. So less generic good stuff cards and more really trying to drive forward the game plan of their respective decks.
I just want to give a shout out to Glint Nest Crane for being an amazing blocker against Mono Red. I love that dude. Okay, so we figured out that we'll only play good cards on 2. Toffel, can you give us guideline number 3?
What do you want? I can't hear you.
Guideline number 3.
Okay. If you don't know, like, you should, as Riley said, you should only play the best 1 or 2 drops. And the most important factor is if they're not insane enough in the early game. For example, Lanova Elf would be insane enough. They should be really good in the late game, or at least worth the slot for the thing they're doing later. As we have said multiple times, Earthshaker Kenra is a very premium 2-drop, because not only is it good on turn 2, it's very good on turn 4 or 5 also. The effect of something not blocking is very relevant, the flashbacking is super relevant, and the combination it has is so premium that if you had a red midrange deck, you probably wouldn't miss it, right?
Yeah, definitely not. Also, all the mana dorks in Gaita, you might say that Druid of the Cowl is not an insane card in the late game, but it's still super, super good in the early game. Like, ramping your mana is such a strong thing to do in Magic.
Yeah, so either way, either it's very, very good early, or it's good enough early, but then very solid later. And the guideline should be mostly to this: is this good in standard? I know Riley brought this up like 1 and 2 episodes ago for everything. Like, if this card is be played in standard, then you're good to go most of the time, because only the best cards will be featured in an environment where there's very good removal and a very threat heavy density, right? So once you have this covered, you're moving your 1 and 2 drops, but basically your 3 and 4 drops will be the same. Sometimes you play a little bit more of those, but they will be the same. You move them on the back end of your curve, right? They're going to be the 5 and 6 mana cards. And then you have to ask yourself, do you have enough win options? Like, are your cards capable of winning on their own? And when you play those cards, are they efficient and strong enough to be a threat? Like, Immortal Sun is definitely good enough because it just draws a card every turn. Additionally, like, Noxious Gearhulk would be a bit questionable because you don't know if this is like effect you really want and need. It's good about removing a creature, but it's besides that only a menace card. You'd rather want something like Modrotha that fills your hand from your graveyard. You'd rather want something Torrential Gearhulk that can allow you to play your strong removal specs back. Like,
yeah, the best card of all time, Immortal Sun.
So you will have to figure out how many slots you have, and with that I would like to ask Jamin how many 5 and 6 strokes you actually play, but you have to find a way to fill your curve on those points and reaching to those things. Like, let's take Mono Red. How many more lands would you play? You play Mono Red, we offered like 22, I think.
Yeah.
So how many lands would you play in, let's say, a very mid-ranged focused mono red deck that plays Glorybringer, that plays maybe even 6 mana option, right?
Probably 25. I always like having access to additional lands. So 25, maybe even 26. But
that's a huge difference, right? Like, those are 4 cards that are not doing anything besides generating mana. So the cards you're playing besides them have to be much more potent than just being random cards.
Yes, indeed. And like, in any deck where I play 25 lands, there's always going to be the 6-drop artifact that draws me more cards and prevents planeswalkers. Because those kinds of cards win you the game, right? You have to somehow overpower your opponent. And if, like, playing aggro gives your opponent the chance not to play some of their cards, right? Because you just kill them before they can play them. But when you play midrange, basically your opponent is going to get to use all of their cards.
So that kind of covers off what you're doing on the lower ends of the curves. Obviously, we talked a lot about 2-drops and then sort of ramping up to the late game. And I mean, you've already mentioned how much you love the Immortal Sun, but what are some of the other cards that you want to see at the top end of your curve in a mid-range list?
Pack out your Trait Binder and take a good look through it, because most of the mythics in recent draft sets, or like rares and mythics, are super impactful. And the only reason they're not being played in standard is because you don't need that many of them in standard, right? You'll just play four planeswalkers of your choice, and then that's your top end. In Brawl, you get to play all the sweet mythics you drafted, right? People play Sky Sovereign, people play Nissa, people play, Carnage Tyrant. I've seen it all. The Eldest Reborn, I know that Toffel is a big fan of that.
That's a standard staple, come on.
Yeah, I guess it's already good enough for standard. The legendary sorceries are often cards I'm looking forward to because they're super powerful. And then, obviously, it's no secret, the Immortal Sun is still good. And then one card I want to mention, because it basically fits everything on our curve, is Walking Ballista. It fits everywhere. You can play it on 2 as an early game defense. You can play it on 8 as your late game finisher. It's just a great card.
Well, I think it just about covers it. If you are looking to build a mid-range deck, there's definitely good news in the sense that you can more or less build whichever list you like. The format is still pretty untamed, and if there's a particular color or color combination that you really enjoy, just pick up the best cards you've got in those colors, slam into a deck, and as long as you follow those guidelines when it comes to building a correct curve, including 1 and 2 drops that are actually clear the bar in terms of power level, and making sure you're not shooting yourself in the foot just with good deck building rules, whatever else, you've got a good shot at it. I mean, we're seeing some pretty wacky and wonderful lists 5-0 in leagues these days. So building a mid-range list is it's not a hugely daunting task. Just make sure you have good cards, a robust power level and rely on good card quality, and you'll generally you'll have a good sniff.
Yeah, and like to put it into one sentence, you still are allowed to play all the core cards you normally wouldn't, and that's kind of the best of it, right?
Yep, that's actually one of the coolest features in Brawl.
Like, where would you reasonably cast the Immortal Sun and expect it to be good, besides limited?
Yeah, it's sweet. It is. It opened. Again, just get that trade binder open and empty it out and stack those 60s. That's the way that it goes. Anyway, we are going to wrap things up, but of course, before that, let's dive into that old mailbag.
You've got mail.
Welcome to Jamin's Mailbag, where I, Jamin, read out your mail. Today, we've got mail from Ben. Thanks, Ben, for reaching out to us. He writes, "Hi guys, I was surprised you didn't mention Vivian Reed during your set review show. She seems really strong. Is it possible she could even be a good enough commander? If not, do you think she'll see play in decks like Gaita or Ovia Pashiri? Thanks for all the podcasts, Ben." So, we didn't feature Vivian Reed, and I definitely don't think she's good enough as a commander. I would much rather cast a 12/12 trampling dinosaur, but I would expect her to be part of the trade binder in green, right? We talked about how many midrange decks are looking for ways to go over the top, and Vivian Reed drawing a card each turn or handling annoying enchantments like Cast Out or something can be really powerful in that slot. I think currently she's very comparable to Nissa, although they fulfill different roles, but they're both 5-mana planeswalkers that will take over the game.
The problem with Vivian for me is that she's just flat worse than Nissa. And I'm not sure how many slots you have for those non-creature spells, right? Like when you're green, especially if you're mono green, you want to have a card that presents a threat. And she's nice-ish, but the problem is that she cannot destroy any creature flat. Well, actually a flat creature, because they don't fly, they're just flat on the ground. Is very problematic, because she cannot be put down and then destroy something and live. You either have to tick her up and then defend, or you have to tick her down and she probably dies. Sometimes not even killing what she wants to kill. I don't see the +1 being too good, and the -8 is definitely not accessible enough. So it's hard. I don't see it. Like, I would play a lot of green cards
before playing Vivian.
Yeah. Like, I was thinking in my head while saying this, and it's like, the Gearhawk is much better. The Nissa is much better. I think I would even play the 5-mana 5/5 that puts a counter on everything.
All right. So like, Toffel not quite as hyped for the Vivian read. I think she'll make a fine inclusion to the green trade binder decks.
No. Maybe when sets rotate out and we lose a lot of options, right? When the next set comes out, we lose the Amonkhet block and the
Kaladesh one.
Yes, exactly. So maybe she gets a bit moved up because there are just no alternatives. But like, I would be sad to play her.
Thanks so much for getting in touch, Ben. If you'd like to do exactly what Ben's done, it's very easy. All you need to do is send us an email, stacking60s@gmail.com, or you can use the contact form on our website. Yamin picks a letter out of the bag more or less every week. Sometimes due to time restraints, we have to skip it like we did last week. But usually Yamin's mailbag, we're always hungry to hear from you. So let us know what's been going on, or if you've got a question or a comment or something you want us to have a chat about, stacking60s@gmail.com. But that's just about that. It is time to end the show. Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Stacking 60s, the Brawl podcast. It's been great to hang out with you this week, as of course it is every week. My friends, we are of course at the beginning of a new month. It is July, and that means it is time to give away all the boosters in the monthly booster giveaway bonanza. And this is a competition that is open to all of our patrons, our exalted and very much appreciated patrons on patreon.com. If you pledge as little as $1 per episode, you get entered into this monthly sweepstakes. And at the end of each month, or the beginning of each month, for the last month, we roll a dice. I've got a dice. Whoops. Whoa, walked right into that one. We roll a die. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, 1,000 pardons. And to randomly determine who is going to take home the big swag of boosters for that month. This month, we're giving away 15 boosters going the way of one of our patrons. And I've got the die in my hand. I can't really make any.
Yeah, you can't really represent you having it in hand, can you?
That's me very gently tapping the side of my microphone with the die. I don't really want to deafen our exalted listeners with that sort of thing. But let's find out. I've got the list in front of me. We've got 16 patrons, and one lucky one of these is going to walk away.
Drum roll!
Well, they don't even have to walk away with them, really. They just get them. Okay, you know that I'm going to put the timpani sound effect in it. You don't need to tap your desk. Okay. All right, whatever. Here we go.
Always pains my heart that they're going away.
It's number 14, which means it is... I probably should have counted from the bottom of the list up. It's Oliver Rausch.
50 boosters, that's half a box.
Congratulations, Oliver.
I want to have the other half of the box.
Oliver was one of the people who subscribed as a patron exactly as we did the last giveaway. Like, he was just too late for the last giveaway.
Oh.
So he's had the maximum amount of time being a patron.
Well, it's karma.
Yeah, congratulations, Oliver. It's fantastic to have you as one of our patrons, and we'll be shipping you 15 boosters just like that. Now, it is as simple as this. If you want to sign up and become one of our patrons, it's a very easy thing to do. And of course, for as little as $1 a month, you could be winning a monthly giveaway worth of boosters. I want to give a special shout out to our number one patron, Steve Bickle. Steve, I met in Pittsburgh. I met him IRL, and it was fantastic. He won the booster giveaway last month. And it was actually really, really nice to meet him. And he's actually upped his pledge recently as well. So he is our number one patron at the moment. And I really want to say thank you to him. He's been a fan for ages and ages. And he's one of our most devoted listeners. So thank you so much, Steve. But congratulations, Oliver. And thank you so much to the rest of our patrons as well, who helped to keep this show, improving, making it the best it can be. We are looking to improve, basically, the first thing is our sound infrastructure, so it stops sounding like Jamin and Toffel are recording from the bottom of a well.
Well, who knows if I actually am recording from the bottom of
Yeah,
the
but
well.
we don't hear it now.
Hello.
Yeah, that's the idea. We know that you, for some reason, go down to the village well to record this. I mean, I don't know why you can't just do it in your bedroom, but we want to kind of minimize that endpoint. Anyway, that is just about that. Well done, Oliver. We'll send out those boosters straight away. And that's just about that. Of course, general housekeeping stuff to finish the show. Stacking60s.net is where you can find everything you need to know about the show, from old episodes to deck lists, our YouTube channel, Twitter. You can follow all of us individually or just the show at Stacking 60s. We have a Discord channel as well. People tend to congregate there to discuss results and tech and deck ideas, especially when in playing through leagues. So please come and join that community if you're interested. And coming up in the next couple of weeks, we have our feature match. I'll be in touch with patrons soon to get those decks selected and locked in for that. And we also have a new segment coming up, By My Voice. If you would like to get me to say anything at all, you can jump on Patreon, and one of our reward levels actually gets me to say anything you want. And I think there's going to be a lot of my stuff is in storage at the moment, but as soon as I get my guitar out and the rest of my recording equipment, I think one of the Patreon levels will actually be me writing songs for you. Ooh. So that's coming up in the near future. But
Stacking 60s patron reward.
No, okay. It's not just one song. I've got more range than that. Anyway,
Stacking 60s patron rewards.
Sure. All right. Well, that's the first song covered. Anyway, that is just about that for this week. We're going to close out the show the same way we do every week with Toffel's tweet. Bit of a dudski last week. We didn't actually have one to read out, and people have really put on a tour de force this week as a result. So, Toffel, let's take it away. It's time for Toffel's tweet.
Toffel's tweet. Incoming. Humans' creativity always ceases to amaze me. Is that never ceases to amaze me?
It never ceases. Oh, well, it could cease to. I mean, in this situation, I think it's fair to say it may cease to amaze you. By the way, Toffel's tweet, a weekly competition where you can win 5 boosters. All you need to do, jump onto Twitter and tweet anything with the hashtag Toffel's tweet. Toffel picks one of them, you win 5 boosters if it's yours. Toffel.
Actually, I think if you literally would have posted like just anything, hashtag Toffel's tweet, it would have been the best winner so far. Which is actually pretty funny.
Yeah, we've got some real stinkers this week. Who have you gone for?
This week's winner will be Jeff Markman. Which, I mean, you kind of have to give him some props for just doing what they were told.
Yeah, doing exactly what they were told. Because I tweeted out saying, hey, we didn't have any Toffel's tweet last week, so if you just tweet more or less anything with the hashtag Toffel's tweet, you'll win. So what has Jeff got for us?
Well, he just literally wrote something dumb with the hashtag Toffel's tweet. And in exclamation marks, I win, right? So, yeah right? That was well done.
That's how you do it.
That's what it like. Do you know the soccer groups, right? You have like those good groups, and then you have some worse team competitions, and it's like, well, you didn't need much to win.
No, just turn up. All Jeff really had to do there was turn up. So well done, Jeff. I just want to sort of get it on top of this for next week. This isn't going to work twice.
No. Right, there's a chance that it works twice.
No. Oh, no.